We spent a lot of time, of course, talking about the change in college athletics, and we think we found someone who could really, really enlighten us in a big way. Dr. John A. Steinbrecher is the commissioner of the Mid American Conference for the past 16 years, more than 3 decades, with 3 conferences overall. And we are so fortunate he's spending some time with us right now. Dr. Steinbrecher, welcome to the show.
Great to be with you.
Let's just start, I guess. Boy, where do we start? You've seen obviously change is constant. We know that, but when, from where you stand, um, did you first see like a major shift? Like, okay, there's change, but this is something that's really going to be monumental. It's going to really, truly affect in a major way more than what I usually see in my role.
You know what? One of the interesting things about being in higher ed and being in intercollegiate athletics is when you're in the moment, things you think were seismic changes, as it turns out, once you do those changes, you go, oh, we survived that, right? And you moved on. So there's been, I'd say over the decades, we probably thought, boy, this is going to turn the enterprise on its head. We may have actually hit that tipping point now. And we'll see if it turns us on its head or not. Certainly from um, how student athletes interact and benefits they can accrue, the world's changing and changing significantly. Now, what effect that has in terms of the distribution of student athletes, the ability of schools to compete, I think that's an open question. And I think there are still details to be worked out that may play a role in that. But buckle up. I don't think anybody's got this figured out yet. I mean, we're still working through details on this proposed House settlement. Those details are important, and then that settlement has to be approved. And so there are some steps there that I don't think you say are foregone conclusions. There's work to be done there. And then there are additional questions to be answered. Still hanging out there is the question of what are student athletes classified? Are they an employee? Are they not an employee? I think the settlement helps push us in the right direction on some of those things, but we're still going to need congressional help on that. So that we can hopefully figure that out from a legislative point of view as opposed from a judicial point of view. And that really, as much as anything, is maybe the biggest change we have right now, is that so much of the change that is coming at the enterprise of intercollegiate athletics is coming from forces, from entities outside the enterprise that are driving the change. And that probably speaks to a lot of things. One, it speaks to how slow we've been in the enterprise to, in fact, embrace change and to be aware of the changing of public opinions and the changing of how legislators or the judiciary may view various things, right? And so here we are. I don't say that as a good thing or bad thing. It is what it is. And so now it's, we better embrace it. We better figure it out, and let's see where we go, and let's manage it in a way so that we are in fact still appropriate partners within the enterprise of higher education. And when I say that, I really focus on the fact that we need to be tethered to educational outcomes. All of the discussion over the past couple of years has really shifted from educational outcomes to economic opportunities for student athletes. And those are valid conversations. But if we're going to remain in higher education, we can't lose sight of, and our first priority still needs to be educational opportunity and educational outcomes for these young men and these young women.
How do you build a consensus for a solution when you have when and I don't mean you in particular, but how does leadership across college sports get a consensus when you have the point of view of a Illinois Wesleyan in Bloomington, Illinois needs to be considered as much as the Kent State Golden Flashes or the Michigan Wolverines? Is there a way, to build that consensus, or do you make a bifurcated deal that adjusts for different conditions?
Well, it depends what issue you're talking about. I think most of the focus, at least on issues that I've been talking about and been involved in with colleagues, has really been from a Division I point of view. But even saying that, there's incredible diversity within the spread of Division I, right? We literally have from programs that sponsor the Division I minimum of 14 sports, and they maybe have an overall budget of 5, 6, 7 million, to programs that could be, you know, an FBS level. We're one of 9, I guess 10 if we still can include the Pac-12. FBS conferences, we have to have a minimum of 16 sports. You know, we have institutions, we probably have a budget range of the upper 20s to 250 million, right? And so, yeah, there's all those sorts of things you take into account. One of the interesting things right now, particularly as we look at the House settlement, I don't know that a consensus is being driven. It's being negotiated by really the 4 or 5 autonomy conferences, with the NCAA playing an active role, trying to represent, you know, you had the autonomy conferences were individually named, and then the NCAA is named. Well, everybody else in Division I is an unnamed defendant in that, represented by the NCAA. So then the NCAA is left with having to, in essence, represent whatever our points of view may be, in addition to whatever the autonomy conferences are doing. So I don't know that there's always consensus there. It's being driven largely by the 4 autonomy conferences, and that's just where we are right now.
And I think it's one of the difficult things about having a conversation in about a 20-minute span, because each one of these topics, we could spend another 45 minutes on each individual topic, right? And we could talk all day long, but we know you don't have that kind of time. What concern, kind of on the back of that, what concern do you have, because the money has gotten so large, in particular for the Big Ten and the SEC? Do you see, is there a concern that they may break off and do their own thing? I mean, is that a possibility that you deal with on a daily basis?
As I sit here today, I'm not losing sleep on that issue.
Okay.
In fact, probably if we do conclude a settlement around the House case, you probably buy 8 to 10 years of peace in our time, to steal a phrase from something else, right? At least from an overall enterprise standpoint, doesn't mean there couldn't be movement among conferences and things like that. So I think that's there. There's always been a revenue gap, always has been, always will be. What's now fascinating, in particularly largely because of where the distribution formula came out on the extension of the CFP contract, you're now going to see a bifurcation of revenue, or a stratification of revenue between the autonomy conferences, which we really haven't had before. That's kind of interesting. We've always, the non-autonomous FBS, the group of 5, we always had a lesser share, and we accepted that and signed on to it. That wasn't the case with the autonomy conferences. Now they're going to deal with that, and you see the incumbent pressures that come from that. You see the conversations that are going on among some institutions and some conferences because of that. That does not necessarily lend stability to conferences. So we'll have to see how that plays out, and how that plays out will have a role on what the enterprise looks like 5 years from now, 10 years from now.
Do you have any vision in your mind as to what it might end up looking like, or is it still so many different moving parts that it's impossible to even predict?
Yeah, I think it is at this time. Well, I would say this. If somebody thinks they have it figured out, I wish they'd give me a call, because I read a lot of stuff. I listen to sometimes coaches, ADs, and even others speak with great certainty. There isn't any certainty out there. There absolutely isn't. This is a absolute work in progress. We're moving into a period of time where obviously, a fair amount of benefits are accruing to student athletes, and we still don't have great regulation around that. So we don't always know what that means. We don't have clarity on how does Title IX filter into that, and how do you manage it according to that. We probably have less regulation around student athlete movement or around roster management than any other level of sport I can think of. And I mean from youth sport through professional. And so that brings with it another set of issues, good, bad, or otherwise. And so I think we're all trying to learn right now, what does that mean? You know, we're talking about possible roster management, or as we think about roster sizes instead of scholarship limits. And you're hearing people, oh, we need to really expand football grants or this or that. I don't know if we do or don't, because we build rosters differently than we used to. This isn't a 3, 4, 5-year buildup. It's every year you're kind of reloading, and everybody is doing that to some extent. And so what does that mean in terms of how we're building our program? Do we really need to be 4, 5, 6 deep in every position? I struggle with that a little bit, but I know coaches are going to have a point of view, and we need to listen to that point of view. They're in the trenches and they're living it, but more is not necessarily the answer.
Yeah. Talking with Dr. John A. Steinbrecher. Once again, he's the commissioner of the Mid-American Conference for 16 years, by the way, 3 decades. He has been in leadership in 3 different conferences. I want to get back to something you mentioned a moment ago, and that is in terms of the academic component and trying to make sure that stays in the forefront. Listen, you know, I'm somebody that I want everybody to do what makes them happy and pursue whatever it is they want to pursue and however way they want to do it. But when you've got, to your point, players enter the transfer portal and changing schools every year, academics has to suffer. There's just there's no way you can have the kind of continuity that you would if you stayed in one place for 4 years. As an administrator, as an educator, I mean, how do you mitigate that? How do you, is there a way that you can? And it feels like that once the horse is out of the barn, there's no way getting it back in.
Well, again, you have some minimal rules around it, right? You have to be making progress towards a degree, et cetera, et cetera. Stick a pin in your calendar 5 years from now. And as we're looking at the data that's coming at us and what's occurred, I can go back 15 or 20 years. And the hue and cry was, we're exploiting student athletes. They're not graduating. They're not doing that. Well, is that going to become the issue of the day 5 or 10 years from now? I hope not. But that's what will force a change again and a reevaluation of how we're managing the enterprise if that is the case.
Do you see any opportunity? Could you have another CFP for the non-autonomous conferences?
Yeah.
Could you put together a tournament like that?
Yeah. You know what? First and foremost, the Mid-American Conferences, and I would suggest all of the other signatories of the CFP, are really happy to be part and parcel of that. We're going to have greater access to that event than we have ever had. That's a wonderful thing. I don't know that I'm looking for, and I'm not looking for something that separates it from us. What I am looking forward to and trying to drive in conversation is a reimagination of the football postseason beyond that. What can we do that brings greater value to our bowl events? They're largely made for TV events. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. And that's really for most whoever's playing it.
Right.
The world's changed around that. People aren't traveling as much as they used to. We're still getting good crowds at a lot of them, but they're local celebrations. That's wonderful. We need to embrace them. But what can we do to drive more value? And by that, I mean more revenue back to the schools through these events. How can we structure this differently? And I don't know the answers to that. We're doing some work on that and throwing a lot of things at the wall and seeing what sticks. And I'm kind of curious where it goes, but right now is the time to have that conversation. We're heading into the final 2 years of our existing 6-year deals. We're probably 6 to 12 months away from starting to renegotiate what that postseason looks like. should 6-6 teams be eligible for bowl games? That's a fair question. Should 7-5 teams, should it be 8-4? And I'm not necessarily advocating for any number. And I know if I'm a coach or an AD, I may be advocating for one thing as opposed to maybe where I sit. But as we look at a time and place where student athletes are opting out of postseason play, things like that, I think it calls into question what we're doing. And I think part of the feedback we need to get is from our student athletes. What interests you? What do you want to be a part of? What are you going to stick around for if in fact we do that?
Got time, I think, here for one more question. You've been doing this for 3 decades, and I can't. I would love to sit down with you sometime over a cup of coffee, beer, whatever, and just pick your brain about all the things that you've experienced. My question for you is: are you still having fun now, like you were 30 years ago, in what you do?
Sure. The joy in this for me is, well, there's layers of it. First and foremost, it's interactions with student athletes, which in a conference office is challenging because when I see them is largely at championship events or occasionally when I'm out at regular season things. If I am bullish, I am passionate about opportunities provided through college sports, and people sometimes look at me and roll their eyes, but I know what it meant to me. I know what it means from a facilitation of opportunity. There's been no greater scholarship grant and aid program for students to go to college outside of the GI Bill than what we do in intercollegiate athletics. And I think that's just vitally important. Second is the challenge of getting your member institutions to row together. That's, the beauty of the Mid-American Conference is I have 12 national public research institutions. We look fairly homogenous. That helps in that battle. Conferences used to be comprised of institutions that look a lot alike. The Big Ten still looks a lot alike. The Ivy League looks a lot alike. The Mid-American Conference looks a lot alike. SEC Conference probably looks a lot alike. It starts falling off quickly from there. And the more differences you have internally, the harder it is to get people rowing in that same direction.
I think that I can't really speak for Mike or anybody else, but or our producer Tony. But the big thing about having you here on the show is you give a much needed face and voice to college athletics. There's so much noise out there just because everyone has social media, can say things, and it gets wherever. But it's been really just really refreshing to hear from somebody, a career educator, leader, administrator, and to get your thoughts on this. We appreciate your time. We hopefully, when we call again, you'll find time to join us again because this isn't going anywhere. Like you said, the change is coming and it's fast and we don't know where it's headed. But we want to say thanks again for your time. Good luck in this upcoming next academic year that just turned over on Monday. And hopefully we'll talk to you again soon.
I look forward to it.
We appreciate it. Once again, Dr. John A. Steinbrecher, he's the commissioner of the Mid-American Conference. 16 years he has been there and 31 years overall with 3 conferences, giving us just some great insight right now with the college athletic landscape and the changes going on and those that are still to come. Watch this space. We'll see where it goes. We've got more to come after this.